Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our interview with Jeanné Kapela. She's currently the incumbent for State House District 5 and will be running for office again. Doing our interviews tonight are Alexia Akbe and Michaela Ikuchi. Before we get started, I'd like to give you some information on HULI PAC. HULI PAC was founded, it's a group of grassroots community advocates volunteering our time. Many of us have witnessed during oral testimonies the problem of being the minority voice, observing seated representatives voting against the āina or the majority of testifiers. The majority rule currently allows the continuation of colonial structures, corporate rule, and methods over Ike Hawaii for āina and its people to thrive. We must collectively understand the individual power we carry as Hawai'i Island residents by getting involved. All right, let's start our interview. First question.
Alexia, you want to kick it off?
Sure. Thanks, Jeanné, for joining us today. Super excited to be interviewing you. Thank you for your time. First question for you. So this will be, you started not very recently. So I just want to take a second to reflect maybe on how you're feeling going into this next race and what's motivating you to run again.
Thanks for that question. I feel like that's a question that I ask myself all the time because I try to continuously go back to my why. And then at the beginning of this legislative session, I actually gave an invocation that talked about how all of us have lived experiences, and every legislator that's serving in the body currently has a reason that they initially ran for office, and that we have to continue to go back to that reason. We have to go back to our why so that we can actually serve in this building that's very, very toxic. And this is a continued reminder of the colonial structure that is Hawaii, right? So to be able to be a Native Hawaiian serving in this space, trying to decolonize this space through the legislation that I'm introducing is a really difficult thing. So for me, and for everyone that's watching, my name is Jeanné Kapela. I currently represent House District 5, which runs from, I was going to say Captain Cook, but Ka'awaloa. So Choice Mart, basically, the upper side of the Mauka Highway, all the way to Shipman Park in Ka'au. It's 108 miles long. It's the largest district in the state. It's also statistically the poorest district in the state. It's the most economically challenged. I initially ran for office because when I had worked in this building and I was a staffer, and before I was a staffer, I was actually I was an advocate. So that's one of the reasons I think why I really love HULI PAC. I started advocating specifically on sex trafficking issues. How do we end sex trafficking through my nonprofit, which was at the time was Unite, which was based on trying to educate students so that they could protect themselves against human traffickers and protect their family and their friends and their peers. And I realized how difficult it was to pass anything in this building, even something as basic as human rights, right? Like human trafficking is modern day slavery. And we still struggle to pass, to this day, legislation revolving around protecting women's bodies, protecting individuals' bodies. And I was so frustrated by that. So I decided, okay, if this isn't working, then I'm going to try and work in the building. So I worked in the legislature for 2 sessions. I worked for 2 wonderful legislators. And from there, I was so disappointed by the things that I saw, even on the back side of the door, where I heard things like delete those teacher emails or close the door because they're chanting too loud. And being someone that comes from an economically challenged household where my family grew up on food stamps, without food stamps, we couldn't eat. You're waiting for the 5th of the month every single month because you're waiting for those food stamps so that you can have food. So to grow up from that kind of household, to seeing and witnessing some of the most powerful people in the state turn a blind eye to those who are suffering the most was so challenging. And when I looked around the building, I was disappointed that I didn't see the representation. I didn't see myself in this reflected in the legislators that were serving us. And I didn't see myself at the time reflected in the legislator that represented House District 5. So I guess the long-winded answer to your question is that I ran because I believe that representation matters. I want young women to be in this building. I want Kanaka women to be in this building. I want Native people to be in this building, because that's the only way that we create change. We create it by being present and by fighting for the change that we wish to see. I'm the first woman, Native Hawaiian person born and raised in the district to ever represented in the State House. I'm the first, but I will not be the last. And the legislation that I put forward is about trying to get more of those individuals into this building.
Okay, thank you. Next
Starting
question.
off strong.
My question is, what are the critical issues that have arisen in your district that you represent that could be addressed by state legislature, and how do you plan to address them?
Thanks for this question. Oh, I'm so excited. Because I feel like in my office, we talk about these things and we revisit them all the time, every single day, because we try to center that why every single day in the work that we're doing. Because otherwise you burn out, and you burn out real fast. One of the things I talked about is that how big my district is land-wise. It's the largest district in the entire state, so 108 miles long. Within that 108 miles, we lack access to water. So about 60 miles, community members have no access to water. The only access that you have to water is whether you are bringing that in, pumping it at one station and then bringing it back to your house, or you have a water catchment system attached to your home, which is A, very expensive, and then B, it depends on rain. So most families, I mean, mine included, you're paying to fill up your water tank at least twice a year. And then you're also paying to maintain that system. And if the system doesn't work, then you're waiting. Sometimes I've heard of families waiting like a year with like living off of like a water tank that you attach to the back of your truck, and then like potting water into your home. And that's extremely difficult. And I mean, Ole Kawai, water is life. So if people don't have access to clean water, then how can you do anything from there, right? So in Ocean View, I mean, one of the things that we need to have, or Hawaii Ocean View Estates, is the correct term for this part of my community. There's no access to water, so everyone is living in that kind of capacity that I had just mentioned. But we can't build school unless we have access to clean water, and this is a growing part of our community, just mostly because people can't afford to live right in town. So if you can't afford to live in town, you're going to live further away from town solely because that's the only place that you can afford. And then you don't have water, and then you don't have a school. And so the students that live in Ocean View are busing to Pono Elementary, middle, or high school, or they're busing to Na'alehu, or even further, Pahala and Ka'u. So, I mean, when we talk about the issues that my community is facing, like that's like the basic and the bare of the struggle that I think so many people in my community are facing. Aside from that, we also lack access to healthcare. It's known, this stretch of land is known as a healthcare desert. So, I mean, we have one hospital, and when I knocked on doors and when I talk to community members, one of the main things that they worry about is, I mean, with an aging population as well, is that they might die en route to the hospital because it takes so long to get there because there's no other healthcare option. So, I mean, I can go on and on and on. But these are some of the basic bare minimum that I think human beings and community members and constituents deserve. They have a right to affordable housing. They have a right to healthcare. I mean, we need universal healthcare. That's another thing. And something that I've actually tried to introduce a version of statewide here in the legislature in my roles current so far. But we just need access to like the basics of life. So for me, I've really tried to center my work in the legislature around those basic core principles. Do we have building affordable housing, transitioning what we define as affordable, because currently affordable housing is not actually affordable. It's like 180% AMI or 120% AMI, which to most individuals, that's very, very expensive. You're talking about like $800,000 per home and up. That's not affordable. 3% of that is like not attainable. So redefining what affordable housing is, creating access to healthcare, fixing our crumbling infrastructure, which is our schools, and then also working on water access so that communities from Miloli'i to Ocean View and even further south on the other side of my district, because you could cut the Hawai'i Island in half and that would be my district, have access to the basic necessities of life and can live a life where they're thriving, not just surviving. That was long-winded.
Thank you.
Alexia, next question.
Yeah, so you briefly mentioned education there, but I know you're a major component for education, serving on both the education committee and the higher education committee. Can you talk about maybe your top 3 priorities aside from infrastructure funding to the schools in your district that you're looking at right now and that topic?
Yeah, so my top priority and one of my priorities since I have been in office regarding education, and I mean, I guess you could call it infrastructure, but it's also not infrastructure. It's like very, very basic, is bus transportation. This is an issue statewide, but it is mostly one of the biggest issues, I think, on Hawai'i Island. We have a lack of access to buses, whether it's in my district or even other portions of the island that are really struggling. So trying to find pathways for our bus drivers to be able to get the licensure to then become a bus driver, because we have a shortage of bus drivers and there's a shortage of bus drivers nationwide. But on Hawai'i Island, I feel like there is a pathway for individuals to be able to get that kind of licensure, their CDL license, and then the specialty to drive a school bus. So one of the things that I'm working on is that, and then allowing like creating a differential so that bus drivers actually want to drive for schools, because currently they're not making enough money if they drive for a school. And then the problem is that throughout the middle of the day, they're not driving, so they're not making money. And it's easier for them to just go and work for the county and drive like the regular Helion than it is to drive for a private company than it is to drive for a school. So creating a differential so that they're getting an extra bonus on top of that. And then also looking at, like, I introduced a bill this year to allow for school bus drivers and for schools to use their school funding to develop different pathways that work for their school specifically, to get students to school. Because I think the other thing that we have to look at with my district is that it's so rural that it's different from any other district. So schools and school principals know the community best and should be allowed to make the decisions that will and use the funding that they get to best suit their students. So that's one thing. Another thing that I've really been working on when it comes to schools, and this is another infrastructure thing, but it's so core, is fire alarms. I have a handful of schools in my district and just outside of my district that don't have a working fire alarm system. And I have one of the oldest schools in the entire state in my district that's like a historic school in Na'alehu that is struggling with their basic infrastructure when it comes to like fire alarms. And then Ho'okena is also struggling with their fire alarms. So students can't learn if they're like afraid that they're going to burn down. And after what happened in Lahaina, I think it's incredibly important that we work on some of these things. So working on fire alarms, the last thing that I want to touch on, and this is definitely not, I think, an infrastructure thing, but working on eliminating standardized testing and moving towards authentic assessments, because I think that for education, and especially in a place where we have such a beautiful host culture, our native culture, we have to find a way to uplift that. And I mean, we can't necessarily do that if we're always focusing on a Western test that has roots in, like, not necessarily colonization, but it has roots in racism. So eliminating standardized testing and moving towards these authentic assessments where we can allow our native students to really thrive and shine, and allow other students to be able to learn about the host culture with the opportunity for our Kaiopuni schools, our Native Hawaiian schools, to be able to grow and thrive in Olelo. So those are a handful of things that I'm working on. Sorry, I can go on and on and on. There's like,
Thank you for sharing.
I did my notes.
Those were great.
I like couldn't get it all on the paper.
Over to you, Michaela, for the next one.
So my next question has to do with a little bit more of our housing crisis. So how do you feel about more out-of-state people and corporations buying up and owning property in Hawaii, which has been one of the major contributors to our housing crisis?
Talk about a loaded question. I think the reality is that it's so disappointing that we've allowed corporations to come in and buy portions of Hawaii. I think when we talk about our housing situation, it is a crisis, because when you look at housing, we have this mass exodus of people leaving. Specifically, young families are leaving Hawaii because they cannot afford to live here. I touched on this a little bit earlier in my earlier response about housing and shifting what we define as affordable housing. I think that that's something that really needs to happen. But I think more than anything, when you look at our housing market, foreign investors can come in and they can buy at 60% higher than any local family could ever think of affording. And then to think that we have these, we don't see them as much, I think, on Hawai'i Island, but being here at the legislature, being forced to be in Oahu, you see these new sky rises popping up constantly. And you know that, I think the statistic is like 1 in 5 of them is filled with a corporation, or it sits empty because no one can afford it. And I mean, I think the reality is that for so long, we have allowed big dollar donations to rule our housing market. And we allowed developers to rule our housing market instead of actually thinking about the people that truly need housing. I mean, I'm a state legislator. By all means, comparatively, I have a really great job. I can probably never buy a home anywhere in the state. And I think for me, that's so disappointing when you look at people who are making minimum wage. There's no way on the planet that they will ever be able to afford a home. So I think we need to find a way to curb foreign investors. And I think that we can do that through our taxes and through our tax system. So one of the things that I've introduced in the past year, or supported in the past year, is like a conveyance tax. We have one of the lowest conveyance taxes in the entire country. And I think that's also one of the only places currently that exists in state law where we can actually tax at a higher rate foreign investors and corporations. So we need to be able to go back to that. I think the other thing that really needs to happen is that we need to work on like a CONAM, so taxing. So there's a couple of CONAM ideas that have floated around in the state legislature. One of them that I supported that was introduced this past year was the tax on investment properties. So these are people's like second, third, fourth, fifth home that are valued at over $3 million. We have to create a property tax to tax these investment properties. Oftentimes, some of these properties are foreign investors. They are corporations. They're not even real people, I almost swore, buying up these homes. So putting a curb on that. The second thing is a vacant homes tax. And I think one of the ways that we do that also has to be at the state level. It has to be through a constitutional amendment, because when we talk about property taxes, those are all done at the county level. So in order for the state to do that, we'd have to, there has been bills in the past where it would be like forcing the county to create a vacant homes tax. And to be very honest, I'm supportive of that. I think that we have to find ways to curb these foreign investors from buying homes here and using Hawaii, I think, as their own personal monopoly board at the expense of working families and at the expense of local families. Yeah, so those would be two of, I think, the ideas moving forward, but also like how I feel, I think, in general about these people who are commodifying Hawaii at really our expense.
Thank you. Lexi, our next question.
Yeah, I guess maybe stemming from that, when you think about rectifying the cost of living and Native Hawaiian wellness, what sort of industries or like development do you think are opportunities that should be kind of pushed further into the spotlight? If that makes sense in terms of, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that some of the biggest things that we need to push is a return to agriculture, and making sure that we are protecting our āina. I think it also leads to destination management, which is something that we really need to focus on as well if we want to talk about true Native Hawaiian wellness. When you look at our current plan for destination management, and there is a bill that's moving through the legislature currently that would help the Hawaii Tourism Authority redefine what destination management is. I think that it's lacking, and I think the job has been lacking. It's, when you look at tourism as a whole, it's naturally extractive. It's a reminder of our colonial system, right? People coming here to Hawaii to take something away from us, which is whether they're coming here to one day buy a house or rent something in the vacation rental pool, or to or to take a piece of our aloha. I think that tourism in itself is naturally extractive. So I think we have to really move away from that and find ways to uplift Native voices. We have to find ways to educate Native Hawaiians and give them access to free college, access to good paying jobs, and work with our university to really strengthen that opportunity for Native Hawaiians. I think that we also really need to find ways to uplift our agriculture space and return to like uplifting and restoring the waterways for individuals who have historically been kalo farmers or have historically been farmers in many different ways that have had their water taken away and can no longer be farmers. So I think that it all ties together, and I think I'm starting to get a little lost. But I think we have to really return to agriculture, especially if we're going to find ways to ensure that local families actually have food security. I think that the best thing we can do if we want to truly sustain Native Hawaiians is to sustain our āina, to have good paying jobs in protecting our āina and uplifting our āina and using the land that we live on in order to actually uplift people. I think it's kind of basic. And I think that's one of the hard things that we think about being a progressive legislator is that common sense isn't always super common in everyone that's in the building. So it's this revisiting and uplifting Native voices and continuously doing that to help strengthen those pathways.
Thank you. Over to you, Michaela.
Okay, so my next question has to do with Pohakuloa. The Army will lose its lease to 23,000 acres of state land at Pohakuloa in 2029. Many residents are opposed to the Army renewing their lease, citing concerns regarding the military's history of land mismanagement and lack of transparency. So what is your awareness of this issue, and what outcome would you like to see in 2029, and how would you work towards your vision?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as you mentioned, these things, so many of these things, when it comes to not just Pohakuloa, but every single land lease is coming up in the next couple of years. And those conversations are already starting. And I think we need to make sure that we're vigilant and I say we as I think the public, right? Because I think it's not just me. As a legislator, I am, to be really honest, I'm very opposed to the military. I can hold space and I can appreciate the individuals who have served and lost their lives to create this idea of freedom in our state and in our country. But I think at the end of the day, when we look at what the Navy and what the military has done here in Hawaii, it's devastating. I think that we have to take into account when we talk about Pohakuloa, we also have to take into account Kawailoa and Makua, and even what they did at Red Hill in order to actually decide whether or not they deserve these land leases. I think the second thing is these conversations, as I said earlier, are already happening, right? They are having meetings. There was one that just happened on the 12th, so last week. And they're talking about appraisals of what these lands are worth and what the and how the military plays into that. And I think the reality is, like, we can't talk about any appraisal or appraisals being authorized unless there's actually a thorough evaluation of the current conditions of each property and the damage that the military has done, and also the way that they're going to remove some of these things that they have done on them, whether it's an exploded ordinances or otherwise, because we know that they haven't had a history of rehabilitating the spaces that they've previously occupied. And in order to move forward, even if we are going to move forward, because I think that for me, that's still a big question. It's a big question of if. So in the position that I hold, I will always be staunchly, I was going to say staunchly opposed to the military. But I think having a healthy dose of skepticism and being willing to openly speak about that through my legislative position is something that I will continue to do, as I have always done in the past, because I think that there is no moving forward unless we can even have some of these most basic conversations. And it seems like the DLNR and some of the people that are holding some of these meetings are starting to have these conversations without even looking into the past and even looking into the present, because the Red Hill spill is still something that we are dealing with and we will continue to deal with for many, many years. Yeah.
I would assume by asking for appraisals that they're considering purchasing the land as opposed to leasing it. And wondering if that was allowed, would there be requirements for them to clean up their mess or maintain the property? I guess once they took ownership of it, they could pretty much do what they want.
And you know, I think that's exactly why it's so important that community members are that there is so much transparency in this process, because so that community members can actually come in and really be a part of the process of holding these lands. The fact that they've released these lands for $1 per year, that's an atrocity to our communities as a whole, to every single person that lives in the state, and to Native Hawaiians especially. So I think before we can even think about allowing something like that, and I think that's the other thing that's really crazy too, no one in the building, the state legislature that currently sits here, was a part of the conversations that initially allowed these leases. So this is a brand new conversation for every single person that is a sitting elected official, and for many people that are still alive today that are potentially going to be involved in these conversations. And I think we have to remain very vigilant in how we approach this. And I think that the community voice, the work that HULI PAC in particular does, is going to be really important, because it's going to take a lot of organizing to A, understand what's happening, B, explain that to the public, and then get the public to be involved in whatever happens moving forward in regards to the lease.
Next question.
I'm going to change it up a little bit, but I know this topic is important to your district. Farmers are negatively impacted by the number of Hawaii branded products on the shelves that are not locally grown or are blended with imports. You've experienced that with coffee in your industry. This is happening with other crops like macadamia nuts as well. Two-part question. Why do you think the farmers and the cooperatives are not getting the support that they need with stricter labeling? And will you support stricter labeling laws and enforcement on these local crops?
Absolutely. I'll start with part two. So the second part of that is I have always supported these very strict labeling laws. I think that it's so important when we talk about what gets put on the shelf and what people view as from Hawaii, when like only 5% of it is from Hawaii and the rest of it is foreign grown. If we're not actually selling the things that should be valued as Hawaii, that we are mismarketing to individuals that are coming here to Hawaii, then we're losing out on all the money. And not only as a state are we losing out on that money, but these farmers, and particularly the laborers that work on these farms, are losing out on the money that they should be getting, because that's hard labor. To pick macadamia nuts is very difficult. To pick coffee is very difficult. I grew up on a coffee farm. I know. So I've always been really supportive of very strict labeling laws for all of our Hawaii grown products, and ensuring that we actually have not just the name Hawaii on something, but a true label of this is something that was grown here, picked here, created here. So truly supporting our farmers, because I think one of the things you asked me about earlier is the transition to supporting Native Hawaiians and supporting individuals who live in our communities. And I talked about ag. This is that direct example of how do we protect people that are living in our communities. You have to protect the workers. So that the first part, and then the other part of your question, I forgot. I'm gonna chalk it up to being a new mom.
I think you did both. Or why do you think stricter laws haven't been passed, or why do you think these folks aren't getting the support that they need?
Okay. I think that they're not getting the support that they need because just like developers have deep pockets, the people who are doing the actual packaging and labeling and buying the macadamia nuts or buying the coffee and like the blenders have deep pockets. And I think that that's a really big part of why certain things in this building don't pass that truly benefit people, that benefit working families, that benefit farmers, that benefit students. It's because the opposition have deeper pockets. And it's so difficult because unless we change and elect more progressive individuals who are going to take really principled stances, I don't know if that's going to change. And I think it's an uphill battle for so many of us to be able to fight against that. So for me, I think really being able to bring community voice into this building, helping educate people on how they can testify so that the farmers themselves can testify, and having worked very closely with like the Kona Coffee Farmers Association, has been really important in helping people to understand how they can best advocate for themselves without that deep pocket. Because I think at the end of the day, true power doesn't exist in this building. It exists outside of the building. We just have to find a way to harness it. And I think the same thing goes when we're talking about agriculture products.
Thank you.
Thank you. Michaela, next question.
Okay, so what do you see as the most pressing issue facing Native Hawaiians in Hawaii County, and what would you do about it?
That's so hard because I think there are so many things that are affecting Native Hawaiians, and I think it's hard to pick just one. Because for me, as a progressive legislator, one of the things that I try to look at is this really well-rounded idea of wellness. And that means like you have to have access to housing, you have to have access to clean water, you have to have access to a good job and healthcare and things like paid sick and family leave with the benefits that workers truly deserve. And you need to have access to mental health care. And I think the reality is that we lack on all of those things when we look at our state. We are so expensive. So I guess the thing that I would say is that the thing that so many of us, I think, are really struggling with is this cost of living, extreme cost of living. And until we can truly address the cost of living and give people a social safety net to stand on if something does go wrong, which we don't have currently, and those are always the first programs to get cut when we have tight budgets, as our finance chairs would say, then I think that we're going to continue to struggle, and Native Hawaiians are going to continue to struggle. I think when we also talk about Native Hawaiians, one of the most important things that we have to talk about is the continued colonization of our people, and the fact that we don't even get a full portion of the pro rata share that is constitutionally owed to Native Hawaiians. So, I mean, I think that in itself is a rabbit hole. But I think when we talk about Native Hawaiians, until we can truly address this continued colonization here in our state and the cost of living and how that ties into it, I think that we will continue to suffer. And I think that's also why it's so important that we have conversations like this, like the one that we're having, which I know is an endorsement, but at the same time, it's also being live streamed to the public. And I hope that the public gets involved. And I hope that more Native Hawaiians run for office, because unless we have more Native Hawaiians who are willing to vote for something like our own future and how we fully fund our future and how we get what we so rightly deserve and what we are owed, then it's an uphill battle for all of us. And the only thing that we can do is remain vigilant and testify and get involved.
Thank you.
Great. Going back to labor, so Malama āina is a privilege, but it's also work. And in today's social scenario, right, you're trading your work hours, you're donating that time while you're also trying to just make ends meet to live. What do you think about the potential or opportunities that we have, either from a state perspective or even more localized, if you have any thoughts on providing paid opportunities that aren't reliant on seasonality or grants for folks to hui up and provide services in their ahupua'a that the government can't provide, essentially. So I'm thinking about in your district in particular, a lot of folks organizing for fishing and conserving fisheries, Milili'i, Kealakekua, all this great work that's happening. But really what I heard is that they would love paid positions for these folks that aren't dependent on grants. So yeah, any ideas on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of goes back to one of the questions that you asked earlier too, that like really ties in. There's an intersection. You know, this one of the bills that I've introduced is a clean jobs bill that would develop jobs specifically in climate resilience, but it also attached jobs that would create jobs in emergency preparation. And I think that really, when we talk about like climate resilience and we talk about emergency preparation, we're also talking about aloha āina, because inherently, like Native positions and Native work and the work that we do to sustain our āina it's climate change, and it's climate resilience. So being able to create that, and one of the ways that I was able to come to the realization of creating this is I'm the chair of the Working Families Caucus. And this was an advocacy organization. This is an advocacy-based caucus that my office developed to really bring together the intersection of like labor and the environment, but also to uplift advocate voices when it comes to creating bills in the state legislature. So for me, this Clean Jobs bill, so this is literally developing jobs that would do that or support the jobs that are already doing that, to be able to come to fruition and find a way that our state can truly support those kinds of jobs, because I know that they exist and I know that people are already doing that work and they truly deserve to be paid for that work. And they also deserve paid sick and family leave, and they deserve healthcare for doing those things as well, because it's so important. That bill actually received support from the University of Hawaii. So I think one of the ways and one of the pathways of being able to support clean jobs is also being able to help educate people so that they can have a pathway into being able to receive a job like that. And then in 2021, I introduced another bill that was on creating like an economic diversification task force. And this would be to create an economic diversification like plan to help guide policy here at the state legislature so we can actually truly support those individuals who are already doing work like that. So yeah.
Thank you. Those are great examples.
Thank you.
Okay, so my next question has to do with a diversified and a circular economy. So how do you see our economy moving away from an over-reliance on tourism to an alternative one?
Yeah, I feel like this was kind of like the through line of what we've talked about all together. You know, but I think not to take up too much time, but I think I'll just go back through, I think some of the things that we've already talked about, that we have to find ways to transition people from jobs that don't necessarily help the environment to being jobs that actually do uplift the environment. And a lot of that actually relates to supporting Indigenous work and Indigenous history that people are already doing, and being able to support that truly. So that, and I think there's so many examples of like what is a circular economy, and I think it also means like moving away from destination management and tourism, and actually helping people just thrive and survive. Like, does a kalo farmer really need to take half a day to explain to some tourist how to pick the kalo, when in reality, like, we should just be funding that kalo farmer so that they can actually just grow the food that may one day be in our on our DOE lunches, so that they have, like, can you imagine if the Department of Education on our school lunches and our school breakfasts had to provide 30% local food? That's money that's directly going to a local farmer, so that a kalo farmer is growing that, or an ulu farmer is growing that, and then is going directly to students, so that they're learning about their Indigenous history, they're learning about the canoe crops that we've that are a part of our history. And then they're eating these really sustainable, locally grown, healthy, and wonderful foods. I don't really know what more to say aside from like the fact that I'm very excited about that, or the potential of having something like that. But there is a bill that's still moving through the legislature that would redefine what our DOE goals would be. And I mean, one of those goals is local produce and using local produce on our school lunches. And I'm going back to education because that's one of the things I'm most passionate about. But I think this is what a circular economy is, right? Finding areas in our communities that need to thrive so that we can all thrive all together. So I think this is one very prime example of that. And I think when we're still talking about food and food security and supporting local farmers and this reliance on ourselves and this reliance on our community, I think the other thing that's important is that we're, from the state side, we're in our state budget currently is funding the DeBucks program, this double bucks program, right? So that if you have EBT and you're going to purchase local produce, you are getting like double the amount of produce that's locally grown by a farmer here in our state, for like double the amount of money, so that our families who are in need are getting more support, they're getting more sustenance, and the farmer directly is getting support on that side as well. And I talk about it in this like, can you believe this kind of way? But sometimes I feel like when I talk to my colleagues, you have to talk about it in like, can you believe this kind of way? And, you know, I think that to me, that's what a circular economy is. It's this opportunity to create pathways where everyone can thrive without a reliance on tourism, but just a reliance on us.
Thank you. Next question.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm going to switch it up a little bit. So I think during your first term, you came out hot with the cannabis legalization bill. And obviously there's still been a lot of momentum in that area, but maybe just the differences in terms of how exactly recreational cannabis should be legalized. Can you give us your current take on that? Because I know that you were looking at it more from an equitable lens as well, and what you're seeing in the policy.
Yeah. So legalization died this year, which was really disappointing. I don't know. There's so much to talk about when it comes to like legalization. I'm a huge supporter of legalization for one of the major reasons is that we need to stop jailing people for smoking a plant. Second reason, this is a huge part of the war on drugs. Third reason, this is something that has truly impacted Native Hawaiians. When you look at our incarceration system, it's Native Hawaiians and Native Hawaiian women that are being over incarcerated at rates far higher than their white counterparts. So I think as someone who has been touched by the criminal justice system with individuals in my family, I mean, you changed someone's life and you lit, and these individuals who have family members who have been incarcerated specifically for smoking a plant, I mean, have the trajectory of their life. It's so difficult to climb out of poverty after having your family or family member or someone who may be a primary breadwinner in your family be ripped away, and you're left struggling. So there's so many reasons why we need to support true legalization. I think on top of that, it's so important. One of the things that I had introduced in my original bill was economic diversification and the ability for right now we have this, sorry, there's so much to talk about. Right now we have this very vertical model of marijuana or cannabis in our medical system. And that basically means that you have like a handful of licensees who had to have millions of dollars up front, which no local person really could afford. They have to do like seed all the way to product that they sell. That's so difficult. We want to diversify that and take that away. And not necessarily, okay, take it away, but allow other people to be able to get involved in this industry, which truly can be a thriving industry that allows local people to have jobs in cannabis, whether it's growing or which we have lots of legacy growers in the district and across the state. And then we also have a ton of individuals who can potentially like sell gummies or sell their candy or sell their dog treat or whatever it is that they want to sell. But there's so many different portions, and we want to make sure that when we're writing legalization legislation that is written in. Because if you just say, oh, I want to pass legalization, then you're potentially leaving it up to some multi-state organization from the continent to be able to come here to Hawaii and take away everything that we have that we're trying to build. So you have to build in that diversification and the diversity within the law itself. So that's always been the problem. Unfortunately, we have a lot of people in the building that don't support legalization at all in any form. So I mean, it's hard to even have these conversations about like what it could look like when you have people that don't want to have a conversation at all about cannabis. So that's kind of, I think, where the state legislature is at. Another thing that I was heavily working on is expungement. So ensuring that people who have this minimal amounts of cannabis or they've been arrested for minimal amounts of cannabis can have their records expunged so that they can be thriving members of our community once again. Yeah, I think there's a lot to talk about. We can talk for like an hour on cannabis, but I think in terms of where we are currently, I think it's back to the drawing board for next legislative session to be able to come up with a bill that supports Hawaii, has the money that we could gain from taxes going back to communities who have initially been harmed, so like Native Hawaiians being able to have access to some of the funding that would be from the taxes, or communities that are economically challenged being able to have access to some of that funding so that we can have healthcare in our communities. Yeah, there's a lot there, but I'm excited about it, and I'm excited about the possibility.
All right. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you so much for joining us. Jeanné Kapela, candidate for State House District 5. And thank you, Alexia and Michaela, for conducting the interviews. We have so many more questions, but unfortunately, we have to get going. One thing we at HULI PAC would like to do is encourage everybody to vote. It is so important that you get out there and vote. We need a big turnout to get people elected that really support your views and your ideology. So have those discussions with your friends and family. And then by all means, please vote. At HULI PAC, we're building something that Hawaii has never seen before, a slate of pono candidates, pono leaders. For more information, please log in to hulihigh.com. That's HULI.com. Thank you very much, and everybody have a great evening.
Thank you. Aloha, everyone.
Thanks, Jeanné.
Thanks, Jeanné.